much.
Sure.
So welcome everybody to Casual Conversations. We're starting our, this will be the start of our fourth season. And my guest today is Valera. Dr. Valera was our first guest in season 1, episode 1. So it's very fitting that you're the first guest today in season 4. How are you doing, Eve?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much, Catherine, and everybody for having me on here. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to see so many familiar faces. Good to see everybody.
Well, I'm down outside of New York, and Eve is just less than 3 hours, a little more than 3 hours away from me in Boston. We haven't seen each other, I think now, since February 2020. So let's give a little background, Eve, and where did you grow up and how did you end up where you are today?
Where did I grow up? Well, I grew up actually in New York. So it might be as far away from you as I am now, but in a little town called Wappingers Falls, next to Poughkeepsie. Some people know that one better. And basically, I ended up here in Boston because of my career, graduate school, etc. Well, yeah, basically going to graduate school brought me here, and then I've just loved it, so I've never left. But it's interesting because I'm one of the luckier ones, I guess, because I kind of knew in high school, I kind of knew I was interested in psychology and things like that. And so I was kind of preparing myself for that. I didn't know if I wanted to do psychiatry or psychology, but I kind of knew in general where I wanted to go. And then through the course of college, I realized that I was very interested in domestic violence more generally, including child abuse and obviously partner violence. And so then I kind of just prepared for that, went to graduate school.
Now, at the time you're thinking about that as a topic, and you're interacting with, family or friends, what in general do the people that you interact with think when you discuss that? Were people aware of it, or were you having to explain what it was?
Yeah, definitely not necessarily aware. Or if they are, they have a very misunderstanding of really the situation. So for example, my mom, when I sent her one of my papers, and you could read the descriptions of some of the abuses, either related to or not related to brain injuries. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that really happens. It's just like no clue that people could be living with such, kind of a bad situation. And then other people, I feel like, they might be like, oh, yeah, more of the, women should just get out of the situation, which is, really I just find that absolutely cringeworthy. And so I always immediately explain the myriad of reasons that women can't just get out of the situation. And so, yeah, I would say in general, just certainly my own experience, there's not a great understanding of what partner violence is overall.
And representation in Hollywood or in other, or let's say just even in journals, were there scientific papers like when you were looking around for other people doing this kind of work?
You mean when I started doing this, was there anybody looking at? Oh, well, if we talk more specifically at IPV related TBI, yeah, there was. So it's interesting. When I looked, there were absolutely no articles in the literature. So this was when I was in graduate school, and I'm going to date myself, but that was in the mid 90s, right? And so, or maybe early-ish, around mid 90s, and there was absolutely nothing there. And so it was mind-boggling to me because I was doing volunteer work in a shelter, and it was very clear to me from the way the women would describe their experiences that they must be sustaining brain injuries. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Because I was also learning about neuropsychology in my graduate program. And so I put the two together and I said, you know, there's no way these women are not getting hits to the head that are affecting certain types of cognitive, behavioral, or other functions. And so when I looked, there wasn't a single article out there. And it's interesting because there were actually a couple of other people who must have been trying to do or doing the work at the same time I was, but it wasn't out there yet. Because we can see, I mean, I know that we're going to be talking about this special issue soon today. And Dr. John Corrigan, who is, you know, the amazing mastermind behind this special issue, was actually one of the first people to produce a paper on IPV related TBIs. And so it's really interesting that now we've come to this many, many, many years later, that he's behind this, what I think is an amazing special issue.
Now, when you're starting to do your papers and you're talking to your advisors, you know, and you're wanting to delve more into this topic, you know, were you getting support from people like, yeah, it hasn't been done, it needs to be done, or did people think you were kind of going out on a limb there? Like what sort of, you know, just to the context of the times?
Well, it's really interesting because, I mean, looking back right now, I feel like they were really, really nuts to let me do it. Because I feel
You're
like
hard to say no to, Eve, so there may not have had a choice.
But I just felt like, I mean, I don't recall really getting, it was like, I mean, I basically went and I said, look, you know, I'm doing this volunteer work. This is what I'm seeing. And it's very obvious that they're sustaining brain injuries. I just went into the library, you know, because back then you actually had to walk your little feet into the library. I know the olden days. And I said, there's nothing here. I said, we don't know what the effects of these brain injuries are having on these women. And everyone thinks it's because they're in this relationship. And of course it's psychologically stressful. So they're going to have these issues. And I said, but we don't know because, you know, there's brain injuries going on here. And there seems to be a lot of them from what I'm seeing, just from this little bit of work I'm doing. So, you know, I want to understand this better. And, you know, I said, basically I'm being trained to do this. You know, I have background in both. So, you know, let's go. And then we had to go out, you know, we had to get, I was actually doing some volunteer work, not volunteer work. I was doing an internship also at Carle Hospital where I was doing neuropsych assessments. And so when I was doing that, I also made connections with people who could be on my dissertation committee. So, you know, basically I was doing a lot and I had my fingers and feet in a lot of different areas. So that allowed me to have basically the breadth to basically feel like I could tackle this successfully. And obviously they bought it. And I had great mentors and advisors. Yeah.
And then from your dissertation to then having your own lab, what was the context of opening the Valera lab?
Well, that's sort of a long story because it wasn't so when you have a topic like IPV related TBI that no one else is really doing, you know, you don't just go and get trained in somebody else's lab because there's not a lab to get trained in, right? So those when I left, when I graduated, it was like, okay, what am I going to do? I did my internship and you know, that was neuropsych and PTSD, which is obviously very relevant to this work because many of the women who experience IPV related TBI also have post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I did that. And then there was, you know, it's like, where do I go next? And, you know, most people have an opportunity to go to a place that they're interested in studying. You say, oh, this person is an expert in what I want to learn, so I can go there. But there wasn't really any, I could either go to neuroimaging or I could look at the brain in a different way because I'd sort of started with neuropsych. So I knew I could do that, but I wanted to learn neuroimaging, or I would go into something like a IPV lab or something like that, or a traumatic stress lab. And then I wouldn't have, you know, the ability to look at women the way, the training that I really wanted. So I actually went the neuroimaging route. And since I had experience assessing ADHD kids, I did ADHD work a little while. And then I got a little grant from the Center of Excellence at Harvard, sort of by the, just by the seat of my pants, I was able to collect imaging data that would allow me later then to write the R01, et cetera, so that now I have an R01 that I can support this research with. It wasn't a super clear or easy path, but I would do it again in a heartbeat.
That's awesome. And tell us about the issue that was just published.
So yeah, it's really awesome. Dr. Corrigan, editor of Journal of Head Trauma Rehab, invited me and Angela Colantonio to be co-editors on a special issue of brain injury and intimate partner violence. And of course, it was like, absolutely, this seems amazing. And, it's like JHTR, Journal of Head Trauma Rehab, has never had an issue like this. And I'm sure they don't publish tons and tons of IPV work. So this was an amazing opportunity to spread the word to a group of folks who wouldn't necessarily see this as much. So this could be great in a trauma journal too, but they're going to see that it'll still be enlightening because they're not as aware of the basically the brain injury component of it. But I think in a head trauma journal, it's going to be much more impactful. And so basically we ran with it. We put out the call, and we got more basically folks who wanted to submit abstracts and ultimately submit papers than we could accept, because it was just one issue. And so we actually had to select through the abstracts and based on other things too. It's like some things would not have worked at Journal of Head Trauma Rehab for one reason or another. But we had to try to select a balance of abstracts to then be, say, oh yeah, now you can submit a full paper. So that was amazing because we had more people.
Yeah, did that surprise you? When you first put out the call, did you expect that many people would be, one, working in that space, have data in that space, and want to contribute papers?
Not necessarily, because it's not just, even if you're working, you also have to know that you can get a paper in by the deadlines. And so it was really awesome. It was, and that was really good news, because it meant that there were a lot of people who had enough information. I mean, some people I think there may have been somebody who was submitting sort of like a review on something like, well, there's lots of those out there, and we want, JHTR really wanted data papers, but otherwise people had at least some sort of data that they were working on already, which was great. I know a lot. I mean, I probably know most. You always think, and then you learn somebody else who's doing it. But I know a lot of people in the field, so I was familiar with a lot of the names of the authors of the abstracts that came in. But it was really great that they had something that they were eager to submit to this special issue. And it's unfortunate, you never want to turn somebody away or whatever, but it's also great that we had and then ultimately folks came through and they submitted their papers on time too, which was a pretty short turnaround time. So that was even more impressive, because people go submit the abstract and then not necessarily have the bandwidth to get the paper in on time, but people did. So I'm a little biased, as I'm sure Angela Colantonio would be, but we think it's a really good issue. We address a lot of different topics.
And what kind of feedback have you gotten so far on the issue?
Great. I mean, anyone who's seen it is like, this is fantastic. The only feedback that hasn't been so great is, oh, I can't access this article. Because if we didn't make it open access, then you have to either have a university access or something like that. But that, we can get articles to individual people and stuff like that. So that's not a big problem. But some of the articles are actually open access. I believe that Dr. Colantonio did make hers open access, and the preface to the special issue is open access. I think a couple of others are too. So you can see at least some, but.
We also at which Angela and Rachel and Eve and Lynn and Kate Iverson were all part of a domestic violence task force. We call it the Partner Related Brain Injury Task Force, PITI. And we have those meetings. I think we're almost 2.5 years into those meetings, and they're the last Tuesday of the month. So in the last Tuesday of January and the last Tuesday of March, we will have Eve and Angela and everyone people will be presenting their papers. So if you are interested in this topic, domestic violence, IPV, TBI, please join up our task force and you will get presentations by the authors of those journal articles. And then switching, anything else you want to say about that before I go to my next topic, Eve?
Unless you have, I don't know if you have specific questions about the special issue. It was just more, we tried to make it a little diverse so that we would touch on different things. We have a couple articles on non-fatal strangulation, which some people, I think now as the field has moved along, people have been recognizing that more and more as a possible anoxic or hypoxic insult to the brain, which is great that there's that recognition now. And then we also we have some articles, at least 1 or 2 articles in there relating to how COVID has affected, at least certainly affected. We know globally that COVID has increased rates of partner violence, but what is typically overlooked is that if partner violence is increasing, and we also know that severity of partner violence is increasing, then the next logical assumption would be that brain injuries within IPV is also increasing. And so there hasn't been a lot of that. I know I have written a piece and then co-authored a piece on that to a couple different places, but it's really been overlooked that the brain injury component of that increasing during the COVID pandemic. And then there's a couple of others. There's a number of different ways the special issue has focused IPV and TBI. So it's diverse, which is one of the things I like about it.
And I'm looking forward to hearing more, and actually the authors presenting their papers on our task force. So stay tuned for that. What I wanted to switch to was actually that. So, we are in the midst of our almost 2 years of COVID. And originally I noticed in March of 2020, articles about domestic violence in China. And we had talked about this, that I actually have it up on the Pink Concussions task force, that literally as COVID went around the globe, so did articles in newspapers about intimate partner violence. And you can literally see these two topics tracking together. And for me, domestic violence was always included as part of the tagline in Pink Concussions. And I brought that out in 2012. And I had people sort of argue with me about it, like, why are you throwing in that you do sports, domestic violence is something different. It's a different silo. So for me, brain injury has always been sports, domestic violence, accidents, military service. So it's been a part of it. But I've noticed the articles about domestic violence seem to be more about a particular horrendous specific incidents or around a famous person or something. And it seemed to me that with COVID, the globe sort of was blanketed at the same time with articles in the press about domestic violence. I sort of have a sense that there's more awareness with COVID from domestic violence. Were you seeing that same kind of, what are your thoughts on how COVID has changed sort of the overall perception of domestic violence?
So, I think and that's one of the things I say is what seems to be a silver lining about COVID. I mean, if you're, there's not many silver linings you can find in a pandemic, right? But one is that, as you're saying, the as you sort of track the pandemic, you were seeing articles pop up about rates of domestic violence, intimate partner violence increasing, calls to police or domestic violence shelters being inundated, and the severity of the violence was more severe. So for sure, there has been an increase in awareness of domestic violence and partner violence, at least in terms of the media writing about it. I don't know how much that has translated into a general increase in overall awareness, because I do find that things are hot for a minute and then they're not. So I hope it translated into more of a general awareness. And I don't know if it has, but certainly from the media, I mean, I would get, I certainly had people approaching me from various media sources to ask me about intimate partner violence and how the pandemic may be influencing it. And obviously the answer is, yeah, I mean, there's higher rates. And so that's pretty clear. I just don't know how well it translated. It's sort of like one of those questions where, well, hopefully, enough reporters, et cetera, really took it to heart and understand it. And the other thing is that it's just happening more. So you're more likely to know somebody. The newspapers, if you're constantly seeing, it's very frequent that if you look at headlines, that you can see murder, suicide, domestic violence, murder, suicide, domestic violence, because that's often what partners might do if they murder their significant other. It's often a murder suicide, and so it's not actually uncommon. And then that will get written about, and then the family will be trying to do something to raise awareness. And I do see a lot of that. I just don't know how well that translates into a bigger story. So, for example, I think that with chronic traumatic encephalopathy in the NFL, NFL players are these like super famous people, right? And they're always going to be super famous. People in the NFL, I mean, you may have different people, but NFL players as an entity are always going to be famous. And since this brain injury disease affects them, that tends to get, I think, more attention. I think that's going to be more pervasive in getting out to people who don't necessarily think of brain injury, in the context of anything. And so I think I definitely saw like there was an increase in awareness in concussion, because all of a sudden people were talking about, what is this thing, this brain disease that's killing these football players? There's tons of money that goes into it. And a lot of researchers then were investigating this problem. And that's what I would like to see happen here. And I don't think we've seen that here. I think we are hopefully going to be seeing more of that. But when you have a really quote unquote important person, as you sort of mentioned, attention gets, there's a lot of broad attention to that topic. But when we're talking about just, partner violence, just those women who should just get out of that relationship, it doesn't necessarily get the increased awareness that I would hope. And I think part of it is really the understanding of what you could say a survivor, a victim, in the legal world, they maybe use the term battered woman. People don't really understand what that means necessarily, and how hard it is to live in that type of relationship. It's almost like if you haven't experienced it, or you haven't really worked with people or known somebody at a really close level, it's very, very, very hard to understand some of what a lot of these women endure, and just an absolute almost inability, certainly inability to easily escape, but for many women, There are just so many levels of challenges. I mean, it's amazing any of the women escape. And so I think really that misperception does not help when it comes to spreading awareness and raising awareness and saying, yeah, this is something that really needs a lot of attention. But I do think we're making progress.
I also I don't know whether you saw the series Made that was, I think it was on Netflix recently. Did you get a chance to see that?
I did not, but I've heard it is wonderful.
I have to say, I think there were maybe 8 to 10 episodes, and it's the story of a woman in an abusive relationship. But I think that brought the topic to, sort of a whole new generation of people that was their, accessible, especially during COVID, for people to watch. What would you like to see in the future? Funding, but what would you like to see? We have more awareness. I think there's certainly more in the press about domestic violence, this connection with COVID, and people have experienced what it's like to be trapped in your house, and the pressures that I think we act differently when you're in your house day after day. And I feel like I see a little more connection to the general population, and again, that may be fleeting, but what would you like to see from the point that we are right now? Is amazing journal, our entire journal on the topic. What would you like to see happen in the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, as you said, I mean, certainly I would like to see a lot more well-controlled, well-done research looking at the impact of brain injury, not just, well, first, the prevalence of brain injuries in IPV related, in IPV. There are a number of papers that touch on this, but there hasn't been a really good, like, epidemiological, I mean, it depends on what you talk about. Like, there may be some in the ERs and things like that, but that's not going to get at the true rate of IPV related TBI. And it's going to be hard. I mean, it's not necessarily an easy question to ask, but I think that's one of the things that's important. And then also the epidemiology of intimate partner violence within shelters. And one of the reasons that's really important is because right now shelters are operating in this way where they have, okay, we have these people on the staff. We'll have a social worker, we'll have somebody who's from the legal, be helping with the orders of protection. We have, X, Y, and Z. And then when you think about it, there's nobody there assigned to do anything like neuro rehab, or somebody who is trained in brain injury and understanding how to interact most effectively with somebody who may have recently experienced a brain injury, or even not so recently experienced repetitive brain injuries. And so if you miss that picture, you're not going to be interacting and supporting the woman in the best way that you can. And so basically shelters across the globe are set up this way. And what I would like to do is basically, I mean, right now, I pretty much know that there's lots of brain injuries in shelters. I mean, anecdotally, we know it. And then there are some data, like I know Rachel Ramirez and the folks in Ohio have, Juliana Nemeth have basically gotten some information on their shelters in particular, and see the high rates of IPV related TBI. So there are some data out there, but it's not so systematic to say we can apply this to basically almost any shelter. But if we can do that in a way that really says, look, right now we have shelters for women who have experienced partner violence, and this is wonderful, right? But 60%, this is just a number I'm making up, and I think it's probably a reasonable number. 60% of these women have experienced either recent or repetitive or both IPV related TBIs. And nobody in that shelter is equipped to deal with this. We need to have a neuro rehab person or unit or something associated with every shelter. And so we need to have the data to back up that request. But I mean, right now, I'm pretty sure we could ask, because I'm pretty sure we need it. I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but we know that there's a high number, and there's absolutely no reason why somebody who's trained in neuro rehab and repetitive mild traumatic brain injuries should not be, closely affiliated with and working with every single shelter. Because they're, it's sort of like having a sports clinic and not having somebody who knows how to deal with sports related injuries. Right.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you think in the sports world, I've said this before, if I were, if I were going to have a brain injury, and I had to choose who I could be, I would absolutely want to be, in athletics, because right there, it gets recognized right away. You get treated right away. They have a plan for what you can do now, how long it will, like what you can do for how long, when you can come back. They'll test you again to make sure you're safe. Women aren't getting anything like that when they go to shelters. There's nothing. There's no recognition. I mean, now there's a little bit, there's starting to be some. I mean, I get, calls, from folks associated with shelters saying, hey, I heard about this. Can you come talk to us or something like that? And I know that Rachel over in Ohio with OVDN, she's constantly giving trainings and stuff. But this is just like, a few people in, how many thousands and hundreds, I don't know how many shelters there are across the US. So effectively, we're not making a dent in really, for the women who are showing up at shelters, they're not getting a large majority, or at least quite a few of them, we'll just say, since we don't have the data exactly, many of them are not getting the basically let's say a whole treatment as they should, in terms of that's going to encompass everything that they really should be dealing with.
And then Stephanie here has beat me to the punch, which my next question is, can you talk a little bit about your work with the court system and with judges, district attorneys, the legal aspect of this?
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. It can be, I mean, I feel like going forward, there may be a little, we have to be careful. We do, I mean, just if we talk about my experience, well, I mean, what I've done with the legal system is I actually have, California's been great. They've been leaders because I didn't even know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they were inviting me out there to give like 3-hour lectures to folks in the judicial system, judges, probation officers, et cetera, to learn more about this issue. And so I know there are some places that they're recognizing that this is an issue that they need to be aware of. They don't know a lot about it right now. I think that's still super, just saying its infancy is almost like even too much. But we need to be training judges and folks within the legal system, within the court system, to be able to recognize potential brain injuries and how it may play out in different situations. The one thing I do want to say, so I just don't forget it, it's maybe a little bit different from what this question is focused on, but there is a concern, and it's been a concern of mine from day one, but one that I think we just have to get around. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do this, is that when you identify a woman, you say, okay, here's a woman, there's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and now Mrs. Smith has been diagnosed with several, Mr. Smith's given her several brain injuries. And now what the judge can say is, oh, really? Okay. And Mr. Smith says, yeah, and she's crazy. She can't do anything. I'm going to take an anger management class, so I'm in the clear, but she's still whacked, so she can't get the kids. And I thought that a judge would never actually give the kids to an abuser, like that, but apparently it does happen, and that is what might happen. And so we really want to protect against that happen and be proactive about it. And there are things that we can do to try to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, you never know, information can be misused in different ways, but for me, if I'm going to be when people have approached me about a court case and something about TBI and partner, and I'm like, well, let's make sure we know what's going to, what might be the outcomes here, because we may not want to raise that in front of a judge. Depending on what the situation is, you may not want the judge knowing that, she's sustained these brain injuries. I think the woman certainly deserves to know, because I think, people need to know what they're dealing with in their lives and what their potential struggles may be. But I think we do need to be careful about how we and who we present the information to, so that it doesn't get misused. But I think overall, there's not a great presentation, not a great understanding of the situation in the legal system. And unfortunately, just from women that I have interviewed myself or spoken to, have come across, it's just sort of like, it seems like it has really hurt them, because she's like, I got in front of the judge and I tried to read something because I wrote it, and I just couldn't read it. And the partner had given her, quite a brain injury, and she said she was never the same after that. And so unfortunately, brain injuries can make people look like unreliable reporters, or that they can't get their story straight. And none of that is going to fare well in front of a judge. Whereas, the perpetrator may very well have a nice, clear, clean story. So we do need to be careful. And I always am very mindful of that whenever somebody comes to me with a situation, with a question about brain injuries and somebody in a partner violence situation.
You had a line in the midst of what you said, which I just wanted to pull out. And sometimes I'm questioned, about this. Like, Pink Concussions offers support, we offer information. We don't have we don't have a rehab facility, we don't have an MRI. So some questions like, you're helping women discover they have brain injuries, but then what are they supposed to do now? And I've said this in the past, that I've spoken to, at this point, thousands of women and talked about the possibilities of TBI. And when they have gone and been diagnosed, I've never met anyone that said, I wish I didn't know that I had a TBI. Mm-hmm. The response is, I thought I was dumb, crazy, stupid, or people didn't believe me. That diagnosis is important in itself, and then to move forward. And it would be great if everybody could access the rehab care, but even that first step of identifying the TBI is important. So I wonder if you could speak to that for a few minutes, then we'll go to questions.
No, absolutely. And I totally agree. I've always taken that stance. And even, like I said, with the legal situation, even if you don't present it to the judge, just think about it. I mean, if an athlete has a brain injury, do you not tell them they have a brain injury just because you don't want to scare them? What is the treatment for brain injury? There is no pill. There's no medicine that you can take to treat a brain injury. Yes, there are rehab things that you can do, and there is knowledge that you can have, like rest and dial back things. But none of that is necessarily well, so the rehab might be, but other things are not necessarily inaccessible to women who we may tell, you don't even have to say, oh, by the way, wow, what you just said, yeah, you've just told me you have 5 brain injuries. Whoa, you're in big trouble. I mean, that would be obviously inappropriate and unethical to do something like that. But you can say, from what you've told me, it sounds like you may have experienced concussions from your partner. You can say it as simple as that. And if some of the problems that you're reporting are certainly things that could result from concussions, or what we call mild traumatic brain injuries. And you can call it, you can do that. And then if they say, what do I do? You say, well, there's not really a set treatment, but now that you know this, you can try to maybe modify some of your behaviors based on what's most challenging to you. Or you can, all you have to do is you can go to any brain injury website and just look at how to interact with people who, well, maybe not all of them will have it, but who may have a brain injury, talk slowly and more to the point, use Post-it notes, dim lights. There are certain things that can be done in a situation that, even if you don't have a lot of resources, you can change your environment, and you can change what, sort of the stimulation that comes into your body to help your brain injury recover. And if you know that, well, if I keep going, you know that that's not going to help your brain injury, then maybe you can try to dial back, even if you don't necessarily have resources. Maybe ask your sister, can you take the kids for a couple of days or for a day, because I just really need to relax, because I think my head's really, just not doing well today. Versus, oh, my head hurts, but it hurts anyway, or I mean, there's things that can be done, but it's not as if, oh, well, once you know something, you take a medicine, and these women can't take medicine. There is no medicine. I mean, it's a lot of what is done for brain injury is based on dialing activities. I mean, when we get to moderate to severe, that's different. And there is a component of neuro rehab, but a lot of it is based on dialing back activities, giving your brain time to recover. And really critically for these women, if you're in that relationship, and again, that doesn't mean that they can get out just because you tell them, well, if you stay in, you could sustain more. But women deserve to know that, because if you are in a relationship where you're sustaining brain injuries and you keep sustaining them, you're certainly not going to be you're not going to be recovering from those brain injuries. And so even right there, even if you can train them to maybe protect their heads, if they can't get out of the relationship, doing certain things that may prevent them from having additional brain injuries. But at the very least, knowing, and everyone has the right to know what the risks are in their life. And if we know that and we don't share that with them, I think that, that's bad on us. So anyway, I think I answered that, but I think that, like I said, if you're in the sports, if you have a brain injury in the sports world, it's like the best case scenario, because things are so set up. And otherwise, lots of people with brain injuries are left to kind of flounder, I think. Even people who have had bike accidents, they're like, yeah, or you just hit your head on the counter or something, and somehow you're still having brain injuries. That many of these people still suffer. So I don't think it's to say like, oh, we can't get help, we can't give them help. There's lots of help that's pretty accessible that people can get.
Well, thank you so much. I know that we have to cut out a few minutes early today, and I see Nat had her hand up. Nat, did you want to ask a question to Eve?
Thank you so much. Nice to see everybody again. Happy New Year. I think that I put it in the chat, just silver IPV, or seniors experiencing domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, that people with disabilities, perpetrators and survivors or victims, how difficult it's been that safety plans are kind of a very loose weave with many things slip through. Each individual safety plan only covers certain aspects, and so compliance to those safety plans is very difficult through the various entities that are supposed to be enforcing it, be that the judicial system, law enforcement, the Department of Justice, the FBI. Each one of them seems to be able to kind of pass the buck to the next entity, and really understanding that perpetrators generally don't victimize unless they've suffered some kind of trauma that leads to that behavior, and that cyclical factors that are involved in that. And then going back to what was mentioned before, access to the judicial system also includes attorney training, to not be dismissive of their client, and for the judicial system to not be dismissive of the complex accommodations someone who's a survivor of a brain injury, be that the perpetrator or be that the victim or both, what specialized supports they need. And if anyone can share in an email, because I can't get the chat afterwards, the links to any documents that were developed out of California, because I've seen some that have come out of the Colorado judicial system to accommodate people with disabilities, but I haven't seen the California ones, and they may not be publicly available. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And Eve had a trouble with her computer, so she's coming back up. But I will definitely ask her, and we will update our resource list. Nick, do you have new? Nick's also a great source of resources. What's the best way to access the Australian resources?
Well, they're probably less readily available than what's available in the US, particularly the kind of resources that are available from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, Rachel Ramirez and colleagues. We're at an earlier stage here in developing information and other resources, but I would certainly direct people who are interested in finding out what's happening in other countries to the report we prepared for the Victorian government in 2018, which was Australia's first attempt to estimate the prevalence of brain injury among both victims and perpetrators of domestic and family violence. It's readily available from Brain Injury Australia's website. In fact, what I'll do right now is put in the chat the URL so people can directly download the report and read it.
Thank you, Nick. Welcome back, Eve. Nat was asking about if there were any resources from the California experience that were shared, and also wanted to share the Canadian toolkit. And I'll put that in the link if there's any. I know Angela had to go. I wanted to put the Canadian toolkit, which is for actually people working in shelters and people who men, women who experienced IPV, and that's also another resource.
There's
any Rachel Ramirez's stuff, Ohio.
Yeah, so you know, Rachel and Juliana, they have a number of handouts and that's those are great resources. Actually, just an example of one of the things that one might be able to get. She has little booklets that you can use that help basically keep track of symptoms and has tips for dealing with a brain injury. And then there's another Paul Van Donkelaar and Karen Mason up on the other side of Canada in British Columbia and in Kelowna. They have put together a website as well, which is a little bit different from the one that Lynn Haag and Angela Colantonio have basically put together. So there are a couple of different websites specifically designed for IPV related TBI, which I think can be very helpful. And yeah, in terms of materials, I know that Rachel has some like physical materials or handouts that you can get. And I believe they're all posted because I've been there. They're posted on sites, I think on the OVDN sites. So you can go and download.
They're also on the Pink Concussions. If you go to Pink Concussions under the Domestic Violence Task Force, we've been lucky enough. We have interviews with Nick, we have interviews with Rachel, all of these people. If you want to watch an interview with them, and then they have links to their site. So you can access that on the Pink Concussions website under the task force. I know Eve has to go in a few minutes, and Amy has had her hand up. Amy, would you like to ask a question of Eve? Can't hear you, Amy.
While she's connecting, I'll just say that Rachel Ramirez's materials are also in Spanish. So that's a real big plus for that.
Definitely. Amy, Amy, you're muted now.
Okay.
You're on.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Now we can.
Right.
Just very soft, but
I am a survivor of IPV and human trafficking. I talked to you once before, the other person that was talking. I found you some kind of way, I don't know how, but I've called you, and it was a long time ago, probably right before COVID hit. And I was like, hey, you got to do something about people that are victims of human trafficking too. Really, no one wants to look at them. They're the worst ones of all. But anyways, fast forward, I've gone through 2 rounds of brain treatments, and I took part in this study, and they found out that my tau protein levels are real high in my brain. but nothing else is abnormal. So right now I'm just on medicine, and I just kind of stay to myself because it's kind of difficult to navigate the world right now. But everything you guys were saying is so right on. I mean, the key though is finding someone who's spoken well enough as a survivor who has gone through some type of treatment or identification to be able to put it in terms that victims who are not survivors yet, because there's a transition that happens, but someone's got to be able to put it in different words. And here's what I've been telling my brain doctors out here in San Diego. You guys have these questionnaires about TBI, but none of them apply to me. For example, question is, what happened? How did you feel before the accident? There wasn't an accident. I've been choked 95 times. I've been thrown downstairs, blah, blah, blah. None of that's on the questionnaire. So that kind of addresses how people can respond and self-identify, which is even more important because our autonomy has been taken away through the violence, and we don't know who we are already. And now want us to tell us something's wrong with our brain? What? No way. And I'm not crazy. You know, it's just, it goes on and on and on. But it's got to be something to do with self-identifying. And I think you two make a great team, and you should come up with something. But I've got a whole thing that I wrote about a program that I wish that they had, and how many people in the survivor community, in the human trafficking community, because I'm published all over the place, and that's been my movement for a long time. But I've been focusing on brain injury because there's one paper that's been published on the occurrence of brain injury in the human trafficking population. That paper is called "The Importance of Screening for Brain Injury in Prostitution Survivors." And 90% of the people that she checked out were positive. So, I mean, you know, it's like IPV on steroids. Yeah. And I just want to say thank you both for your work that you're doing, and hopefully something can come out of this conversation. And I have nothing but time on my hands.
No, Amy, thank you so much for your comments. I'm sorry, you know, you're struggling with the issues of obviously post-concussive syndrome, if you want to call it that. And there's probably more, there may be more as well going on there. But I do appreciate your comments. And one of the things you said was the questionnaire. And you're absolutely right that historically TBI questionnaires are not designed to address or pick up brain injuries like the ones that people that like you might be sustained, or the people, you know, who are experiencing partner violence might sustain. I actually, to do my research, I had to create my own. And what I say is, I leave it as, after anything your partner ever did to you, did you ever lose consciousness or black out? Or after anything your partner did to you, did you ever feel really dazed, confused, or disoriented? And then I find out what happened. So in that way, it's hopefully getting closer to what, you know, to identifying something like it. No, it's not an accident. You're right. And I don't call it an accident because it's not. It's violence against you. And that's a really well taken point. And we in this world we're still trying to identify the best. I mean, I put together that brain injury, interview because there was nothing else. And I still don't think we have a perfect one. But there are a number of us who are sort of working towards getting better interviews out there, that and part of what you're talking about is just being sensitive to who you're talking to, and to, you know, what the real issues are. And yeah.
Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
What you were saying earlier was like perfect when you said they really don't want to hear from you anyways. I used to be a public speaker for years. I traveled all around the country, went to DC and blah, blah, blah. Now it's very difficult for me to find a speaking gig anymore, not just because of COVID, but because as I've progressed a little further towards more effects of my brain injuries, it's a little more difficult for me to find my words. And so therefore I don't mince my words. I'm very to the point. Sometimes I use bad language and I really don't care. And, you know, it's like I'm trying to get a point across, and the thing that I'm talking about is very important for you to understand. And so I had to limit myself, because otherwise people think, like you say, that I'm a brain injury survivor and I'm crazy. That's always what they want to do, put us in the mental hospital and say we have mental health issues, blah, blah, blah. So, and we don't want to be that. We know, we're like, it's not that, it's my brain. There's a difference between my mental health and my brain, I think, but the thing is I think it's empowerment is the most important key.
Mhm.
Because when I was able to identify, this is the thing that's wrong with me, that I've seen, and as I looked over like my social media, I noticed for several years before I actually first I wrote doctors letters everywhere, please help me. And I noticed a pattern on social media. I was saying I had all these problems with my brain. So I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. So I had to make it something I could understand and break down into little pieces so that I could accept that and then start to get well and get better, which now I am. I mean, I was at a point where I couldn't even talk. So it was pretty bad, but I think it's breaking it down into little tiny morsels in a way that's comprehensible by someone who's in the midst of trauma. I like to say, unfortunately, I use the term childlike, but having a little comic strip, which I have, the amygdals and the cerebros, they talk about brain injury and they make it funny and they make it understandable and relatable. And then you kind of go, oh, yeah, I've been there too, looking for my keys when they're in my hand. Yeah,
Well, I really appreciate you sharing, Amy, and definitely connect with us. I mean, there are opportunities when we have panels to speak, and your voice is really important. So I really appreciate you sharing your story in this forum today and validating the great work that Eve is doing. And Eve, can you give the name of the journal again, and just a little anything else you want to say about your work for people that want to find out more?
The name of the journal is the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation. And I basically, my work is ongoing. We're recruiting, folks who have experienced IPV related TBI. And since it's virtual, we can actually do it from anywhere. We have, so you can always sign up if you're interested in being a participant, except for you can't do the whole thing because then you'd have to be local, but otherwise, my work, the transgender work that we're starting, I think is going to be really important because there's even less information, or there's no information in that area. So I'm really excited about the work we're doing, and some of the work that we're doing stems out of the people who come and intern in my lab because they have different interests or special interests. And I think that's really exciting because we have a couple of different things going on there. So I think that's all I have. I want to thank everybody for being here and anyone who's participated. And yeah, I think the issue is really exciting. It's broad and diverse, and we're really super excited to talk about it in the upcoming PIBI task force. So thanks so much for coming here.
Thank you, Eve, and looking forward to next week. We're going to have 2 doctors from Cognitive Effects talk about the work they're doing with prolonged concussion symptoms and work they're doing with long COVID. So look forward to that next week. And then when I finish editing this video today, that'll go out, and I'll make sure I put links in the email to the different resources that we talked about, including Nick's and the task force, both Karen's and Angela and Lynn's work. So I'll make sure there's a lot of resources on that next email. So thanks everyone, stay safe. Thank you so much, Eve. Thank you everybody at IDIA, Megan, Margaret, and Jennifer, and see you all next week. Hi, Linda. Bye, Linda. Bye, Lori. Bye, Jill. Bye, Teresa. Take care.